Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Becoming an Alpha podcast, where we look over the different aspects of biblical masculinity so that we can become the alphas that we were born to be. Ladies, if there are any of you out there in the audience, please stay, because this will be useful information not only in finding prospective husbands, but being of assistance to the husbands that you have, or of raising your sons to be the alphas that God always planned for them to be. Now, in our past two videos in this non-alpha series, we have looked over the two different types of omegas, the warrior omega and the diplomatic omega. Today, we're going to be looking at the differing classifications of the beta male. Now, unlike the omega males, who are individuals who are incredibly personally competent, but lack the team spirit necessary to be an alpha, the betas have the reverse problem. They have a very good sense of team spirit, but they lack the personal competence necessary. Now, I'm going to do all the different betas in a single video rather than separating them, because the two different types of omegas that I established before, they are different not just in categories of the same thing, but they are instead different in what it is they're trying to achieve. The warrior omega is trying to achieve survival. He is not being part of a team specifically because he does not want to be vulnerable in his life. Whereas the diplomatic omega, he is not honoring the team because he is only concerned with himself, and he's concerned with raising himself to the highest level of ambition. The warrior omega is motivated by survival, whereas the diplomatic omega is motivated by conquest. Those are two different types of individuals, and so I did them in separate videos. However, the betas, all the different categories of betas, are all motivated by the same thing. They specifically are concerned with the level of value that they have in the team. Not to say that they are trying necessarily all the right things to earn the value that they want, but simply they are so obsessed with their value levels in the team that they very often end up hurting the team rather than helping it. They manifest it differently, but it's all the same source of beta male energy. Now, as I said, the betas are individuals with a good team spirit, but they lack the competence necessary in order to benefit the team. Now, I need to go over incompetence specifically because we need to understand what that means, because it does not mean that there is no value to this individual whatsoever. That is not true of anyone that I have ever met or read about, apart from those who are brain dead. There is no such thing as a person without any value whatsoever. All have some level of value. Now, this is partially born from the fact that humans have an unbelievable level of potential. We have an amazing capacity to be of use to one another and to assist one another. For example, Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking is a man who suffered from ALS to the point that his body was broken, and the only way he could communicate was through a computer interpreting his thoughts. And yet he was still one of the great scientists who helped to revolutionize our understanding of physics in the universe. Or John Nash. John Nash was an individual who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and required huge amounts of medication in order to be sane, but the medication at the time in which he lived, which was in the early days of Vietnam, made him so robotic that he seemed useless. So instead, he overcame much of his schizophrenia through sheer willpower by focusing on what was real rather than what was fiction. And this man also contributed to mathematics so much that he essentially created a mathematical basis for the alpha philosophy that I am describing here. Adam Smith had been the prevailing theory when it came to economics, believing that the best result for society comes when everyone's doing what's good for themselves. John Nash, on the other hand, established that the best result actually comes when everyone is doing what is best for themselves and the group together. Personal competence and group mentality. And he used advanced mathematics in order to demonstrate this. It became the basis of numerous antitrust cases, and it won him the Nobel Peace Prize. Despite the fact that he was a paranoid schizophrenic, he still was able to contribute this way. So do not think that when I am describing incompetence, I mean that you are without value. Not at all. And not only does your value come from your limitless potential, but also with the natural adaptability that humans have with one another. We have a natural capacity to be able to transition to different things based on where our lives are taking us. For example, David in Scripture. David began as a shepherd, tending the flocks of his father, until King Saul was suffering from what was either manic depression or likely, in my opinion, bipolar disorder. And he became a musical therapist on behalf of Saul. And then he was needed to be a champion for Israel. And then he became the captain of 600 outlaws and their families. Then he became king of all Israel. And in his final days, after he gave the throne to his son Solomon, he served as a counselor to him. His life very much followed the path of Don Corleone in the Godfather movies, who began as a simple servant to the mafia don at the time, and then as a soldier, rising eventually to the level of Don himself. And then when his son Michael was ready to take over the family business, he became a consigliere to him. We have an unbelievable ability to adapt, and we have an almost unlimited amount of potential in our capacity for service. Now, so having no value whatsoever is not the definition of incompetence, nor is the definition of incompetence needing assistance. There is that old expression, getting help does not make you weak. I myself am not a fan of that expression, and I'm mostly not a fan of that expression because of the generic amount of the English language. Multiple meanings within individual words has led to much confusion throughout the English language. I personally prefer many of the ancient languages who had different meanings or different word designations rather, depending on the meaning that you were discussing. For example, the ancient Greeks. I have found at least 7 different words that they had for the word love alone. There was agape love, which meant universal. There was storge love, which was a family type of love. There was phileo love, which was the love that comrades have for one another. There was xenia love, which is the love that a host shows to a guest. We have eros love, which is a attraction, a desire that romantic partners would have for one another. There is the pragma love, which is the basis of pragmatism, where it makes sense for us to be together no matter what else that we have. And then there was ludas, which is a very playful, childish type of love. And even in modern languages, some of these different words for different types of meanings applies in the rules of their language. For example, Spanish and the word no. In Spanish, there are 2 different words for the word no. There is saber, which means to know a fact, and there is conocer, which means to know a person, communicating different types of meaning by the words designated. So I'm not going to say that getting help doesn't mean that you're weak, because by the fact that you need help, obviously you possess a certain amount of weakness. That weakness could be temporary damage, or it could be a crippling damage that makes you impaired for the rest of your life. Much like Stephen Hawking, he was impaired. He had to have that wheelchair and that computer who did his talking for him. But that does not mean that you are, the word I'd prefer, broken. Particularly referring to the definition of broken that Morgan Freeman used in the movie Dolphin Tale. In that movie, Morgan Freeman played an individual who made prosthetic limbs and helped with soldiers who were recovering from their wounds in war. And he was dealing with an individual who had wanted to be an Olympic level swimmer and had joined the military so that he could pay for the training programs and such. But in his service, his leg became crippled and he required a brace. And in all likelihood, he was not going to be that Olympic swimmer that he wanted to be. And Morgan Freeman told him, just because you're hurt, that does not mean you're broken. And the veteran said, no, trust me, I'm broken. Morgan Freeman picks up a glass and drops it on the floor, shattering so that it is beyond any use whatsoever, worth nothing but to be thrown in the trash. And Morgan Freeman said, no, that is broken. You still have people who need you, and you still have an ability to be of service to them. So needing help is not what I mean by being an incompetent individual. For crying out loud, this is even a biblical principle. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, it says, we are pressed on all sides, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not in despair. We are persecuted, but we are not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. Suffering and debilitating effects of life does not make you incompetent. What instead makes you an incompetent individual is that the sum of your parts ends up being a pain and a destructive force to whatever team you have joined yourself to. Whether you're a cook and you simply do not have all of the cooking skills required to be an asset to the kitchen rather than a liability. Whether you are a member of a family and the things you do end up hurting the family more than they ever help the family, the sum of your parts is what I'm referring to when it comes to incompetence. So this is why you shouldn't lose hope if you're currently at the beta stage, because you have a vast amount of improvement that you are capable of. Now, from here, we're going to go into what I consider to be the 3 types of betas that I've seen in my studies. The first type I want to go into is what I consider the most classic type of beta, the jealous brother beta. This one goes all the way back to the 3rd person ever to walk the earth according to the biblical account of Genesis, Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve, who was jealous of his brother Abel because apparently Cain was not honoring God, and so he was not getting rewarded, whereas Abel was honoring God, and so his offerings were being accepted with grace and he was prospering. Now, when it comes to the jealous brothers, they are individuals who see higher members of the team and they focus on either trying to get to the level where they're at or else destroying them so that they will not be superior to them. Rather than thinking about what is best for the team, they are concerned about their place of value within the team. And they are concerned particularly with how a different member outranks them. Now, a wonderful example of this is in the show Suits, particularly with a character named Louis Litt. One of the main characters, Harvey Specter, represents the superior brother in this example. Now, Louis Litt, like I said, betas are not people without any use or value whatsoever, and Louis is no exception to this rule. Louis is a lawyer who graduated from Harvard at magna cum laude. In addition to that, he specializes as a corporate finance wizard. Nobody knows corporate financial law better than Louis Litt in the city of New York and in most other places of the world. More than that, he is a natural mentor and was put in charge of training the associates to be the lawyers that they needed to be so that maybe one day they could become partners in a law firm. And also, he is a tireless worker. There is nobody in the firm in this show who puts in more billable hours than Louis Litt. But that doesn't mean that he is always a benefit to the firm. He has many different attributes that help him to benefit the firm, but he often ends up being more of a harm because of his obsession with the fact that Harvey is in a superior position to him. Now, he does several things that end up hurting the firm. First, without anything to do with Harvey, he costs the firm numerous times because he has an emotional imbalance born of his need to stick it to every individual who made him feel less than what he thought that he was worth. And this ends up blinding him with the arrogance of his position. He continuously is concerned with his value in other people's eyes rather than knowing his value in himself based on everything else that he contributes. He needs other people's validation in addition to this to a degree that ends up costing the firm twice. Once, he blew up merger negotiations because someone was not reading his letters to their cat. I'm not kidding you there. It's one of the funniest moments in the entire show. Go watch it. It's a really good show. Up until season 8 and 9 where it started to lose itself a little bit. Then, in addition to this, when he was sent to go and stop another lawyer who had put a temporary restraining order on one of their clients' ability to purchase stocks, this other lawyer decided to manipulate Louis into thinking that the love of his life was engaged to someone she was in fact not engaged to. In fact, using Photoshop pictures from 1998 model in order to fool him. And as a result, he ruined the entire case and he ended up hurting the firm. And that's just the validation he needed from, in one case, the love of his life, and the others, a cat. It's hilarious, but it is beta mentality, born of his jealous brother syndrome and constantly needing to be validated by others that he believes are in a superior position. But back to his jealousy over Harvey in particular, he ends up hurting his firm significantly when it comes to Harvey by being manipulated by not one, but two different diplomatic omegas within that show. The first one is actually a partner in the firm, the former managing partner, Daniel Hardman. In the show, in the second season, he decides to align himself with Daniel Harmon to bring down the current managing partner, Jessica Pearson, because he believes that Jessica will only promote Harvey and not him, and is more concerned with his position in the firm rather than his benefit to the firm. But it turns out that Daniel Harmon was a diplomatic Omega who was using him, as diplomatic Omegas often do, to betas. Betas have often been the tools upon which diplomatic Omegas build themselves up. And then later on, he was used again by an unscrupulous investment maker named Charles Forsman. And in this show, he had, so he thought, gotten Forsman to make a decision that really, really benefited their firm. And everyone, including Harvey and Jessica, were praising Lewis as a hero. But then Forsman called Lewis in and said, I want you to funnel the money involved in this deal through Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, which was tax fraud. And Lewis, not wanting to admit that he had in fact failed rather than succeeded, let himself get cornered into this, and even to taking $1 million payout in order to get it done, because he was just so desperate to be valued in the firm that he was willing to jeopardize the firm's legal standing in order to make this happen. Now, when it was finally found out that he had gone this far, he decided that he needed to resign. And his resignation letter is such a beautiful expression of the humility that one needs in order to become an alpha. He said, Dear Harvey and Jessica, there comes a time in a man's life when he must look at himself in the mirror, to examine himself rather than waiting to be examined by others. And for me, that time is now. You both know that I came to this law firm right out of law school, but what you do not know is that this is the only place I have ever worked, and it is the only place I have ever wanted to work. It is my life, and it is my home. And the people who work here are my family. You're like my parents, and the partners are like my siblings, and the associates under my care are like my children. And I put you all at risk for my own personal gain. I told myself that it was for the right reasons, but the truth is, I just wanted to feel like I was on the same level as you, and I can deny that no longer. I can excuse my actions no longer. And although we have had our differences in the past, there are no two people that I respect more. Your names are on the wall for a reason, and mine is not for a reason. And I refuse to put either one of you through the pain of having to fire me. So effective immediately, I, Lewis Litt, am resigning from Pearson Spector. Please take care of my home. This letter was such a profound statement of humility that he recognized the beta nature of his qualities. When he recognized that he put this firm at risk, telling himself that it was for the right reasons, but then realizing that it was because he was desperate to feel that he was on the same level as these individuals, and recognizing that the reason he was not as advanced as they were was because he was not able to be as of much benefit to the firm as they were. He recognized that he lacked the competence to be at that place in the hierarchy. And from this point on, while Lewis has some setbacks and some relapses into his old habits, he still begins from there on the upward journey to being the alpha that he was always meant to be. But there is another form of the jealous brother beta spirit. The form that Lewis Litt has was a workplace spirit, but there is even a romantic side to the jealous brother beta. And that is most exemplified in the character Titan from the movie Megamind. Titan is an individual who suffers from what many psychologists term as the nice guy syndrome. This is an individual who has some genuinely good feelings for another person, but lacks the competence necessary in order to be attractive to that person. And this person ends up becoming jealous, not necessarily for even bad reasons. I mean, there are often been girls who have gone with the bad boy individual who treats them like garbage instead of the nice guy who would not make them feel safe, even though he would treat them with more respect. And so Titan goes on a journey where he gathers the superpowers which he thinks will make him more attractive to the woman. But the truth of the matter is, while he was attracted to her, he never bothered to get to know her well enough to know that she was in fact a sapiosexual. What she was attracted to was a person's intelligence. She was attracted to an ability to come up with new ideas and innovate new and different things. Simply having raw power was not at all attractive to her. And so when she rejected him, he became wrathful and vengeful. Very similar to Syndrome in The Incredibles, who, after being rejected by his hero because he did not, while having a good team spirit, he was not applying something that Mr. Incredible felt that he needed in order to be a part of the team, he decided to take vengeance upon him, still letting his obsession with his value in that other person's eyes drive the actions that he chose to commit, rather than letting his actual value, based on a reliance on God and how he has told us to honor one another and the purpose that he has given us in our lives, determine where his value actually was. Now, that was only the first category of betas. The next category of betas that I want to talk about is the person that I call the career social warrior. Now, this beta is more difficult to identify. This is a far more nuanced individual, because there are truly times where we need social warriors. We need people fighting for just causes, fighting against unfairness. But there are certain qualitative differences between the alpha version of the social warrior and the beta version of the social warrior. For one thing, alphas are not career social warriors. They are usually out trying to solve a particular problem with a solution, and then once it is achieved, as long as the problem is corrected the way they expected, the fight is over for them. The beta version, on the other hand, similar to what one character said in Black Sails, is an individual whose identity is so wrapped up in the conflict that they are more afraid of ending the conflict than they are of failing in the conflict. Now, another thing that separates the social warrior alpha from the social warrior beta is the virtue in the way that they conduct themselves. For example, in the mini-series North and South, there are a group of unionists who are trying to get fairer treatment from the different textile factories that are employing them. But their leader, a man named Higgins, has made it clear that under no circumstances are they ever to use violence. Strikes are acceptable, but under no circumstances are they ever to use violence. No matter how poorly they are treated, no matter what happens, violence is not an answer. Because he understands that when you're willing to do anything and everything in order to get the result, you end up hurting the ultimate fate of the cause, all for a short-term benefit. Now, contrast this to the Antifa organization, on the other hand. The Antifa organization is so focused on its social war that it has literally said, no justice, no peace. Ready to destroy everything and burn it to the ground. Just like Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, they can be the lords of the ashes. Now, a third distinction between the social warrior alpha and the social warrior beta can be found in the fight for civil rights versus the current movement of Black Lives Matter. Now, in the fight for civil rights, the theme of the movement, from Frederick Douglass all the way to Martin Luther King Jr., was make the rules of the game apply to us the same, and then let us play. And if we lose, we lose. If we win, we win. But as long as the rules apply, we will not say anything from there. Frederick Douglass is famously known for saying, "All I ask is give the black man a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone, for your interference is doing him a positive injury." He did not want people assisting the black community. What he instead wanted was to make sure that the rules were being applied fairly, with no arbitrary restrictions on the potential for the progress of individual members of the black community. And Martin Luther King fought for the exact same thing in his I Have a Dream speech, when he said, "I pray for a day when people will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin," indicating an emphasis on individual merit and skill, rather than an emphasis on group-associated identity. Black Lives Matter, on the other hand, has fought rather than for the rules to apply to the black community so that they can have a chance to succeed, they have instead fought for the rules and the entire game to be thrown out altogether. They have fought to defend the police, indicating that there should be no means of penalizing others. They have fought for affirmative action, indicating that even when you don't reach the standard, you should still be able to get the prize, because apparently the people in Black Lives Matter think that Black people are inherently weaker and do not have the potential to meet the same standards. They also want to get rid of standardized tests and gifted classes because very often Black children do not make it into these classes. Now, that isn't to say that they're inferior. Very often, this is coming from the result of the Black community having a 75% single mother household, where men are either abandoning their families or women are taking the children away from the fathers and raising them on their own. This single motherhood rate is causing unbelievable destruction in the Black community. But it doesn't even stop there. For criminals even, Black Lives Matter has argued that the criminal records should not be admissible towards future employers, who have a right to know whether or not they are dealing with someone who has a possibility of relapsing back to the criminal mindset. Now, the alphas and even the omegas, they just want the rules to apply. They want to be able to play the game and have a chance of succeeding at the game. Look at Ben Carson, for example. Dr. Benjamin Carson is one of the greatest surgeons alive. He has performed revolutionary techniques, even being able to separate conjoined babies for the first time in medical history. But he was being raised by a single mother. Not just a single mother, but a poor single mother who had to work as a maid and did not even know how to read. But that mother understood the principles of humility and courage and the virtue that was necessary in order to make her child a successful student. She had him read. She knew that he knew how to read, and she told him, "You will only watch 2 television programs a week, and then you will spend the rest of your time reading 2 books and writing a report on each book. And those reports will be due on Friday, and if they're not done, you will not go and be with your friends on the weekends." And Benjamin Carson just kept reading and reading until he became a surgeon. A neurosurgeon, moreover. That is one of the hardest things in the world to be. And before his mother implemented that plan of just having her child read constantly, he was making D's and F's on his report card. He was a problem student rather than a problem solver. And to this day, he is one of the most famous neurosurgeons alive and even ran for president and served in an official office in the Trump administration. Now, beta social warriors, they don't want rules. And the reason that they don't want the rules of the game to apply to them and don't even want the game in general is because they don't like the ideas of winners and losers. Because they do not want to face the hierarchical structure and the idea that someone could be above them. That's why I have the anarchy symbol as the thumbnail for this particular video, because the anarchy movement is an entirely beta-based mentality. Now, granted, they have some virtue among them in wanting there to be a dignified way of life for all of the people that they know and that they love, but this does not change the fact that they are also trying to overthrow hierarchy in general because they don't want to admit that we are not all equal in every aspect. We're not all equal in our ability to produce and to build, or in our ability to fight against injustice and destroy those who serve the darkness. Sometimes there are those who are better situated. Sometimes that is by birth. Sometimes that is by native talent. Sometimes that is simply because they chose to make better choices with their life. We all vary in ability, but that does not mean that we are useless just because we do not reach the same level of the hierarchy as someone else. The fact that there are other podcasters who are being more successful than me at this time, I admire them for that. They have worked hard and they have been brilliant in their ability to make successful media platforms. And I am trying to do the same. I don't resent them because they have been successful, and so far I have not, because I recognize, A, I'm new at this game, and B, I don't necessarily have the same skills that they do. Our differences should be celebrated. And ironically enough, many of the social warrior betas want to celebrate diversity, but they don't see the correlation that if you really want to celebrate diversity, you have to celebrate diverse outcomes, which will result in different levels on the hierarchy, both social, economical, political. You will all reach different levels. Now, the final beta category that I want to go over, and this in particular is the one that is most critical, because this is the one that our culture wants men to be more and more this time, and that is the simp, otherwise known as the simpleton or the sycophant. a person who just continuously sucks up to the public. Rather than being assertive when it is a matter of conviction, they instead just hide behind the popular opinion. Now, in a biblical matter, the greatest example of this that I have ever seen in all of Scripture was King Saul of Israel. His entire life was that of a beta individual. Now, when we first meet King Saul, the people of Israel have demanded that Samuel, the prophet and judge of Israel, give them a king. And Samuel goes to God, and God says, I'll give them a king, but they should have recognized that I was the king in their lives. And so Samuel is sent to Saul, and he tells him, God has anointed you to be king over Israel, and you will see these 3 signs to indicate that I am speaking the truth. And sure enough, King Saul goes, and he sees those signs. And then, when the day comes to announce his kingship to all of Israel, where is King Saul when Samuel calls him to the stage? He's hiding, like a coward. He's hiding in the luggage that everyone brought. And so Samuel has to ask God to tell him where Saul is. He goes and gets Saul and brings him up and says, this is the king. And there are some people who are objecting. And in my opinion, rightly so, considering what a coward that he had proven to be so far. And so when Saul saw the objection, what did he do? Again, like a beta, even though he knew that his kingship was God's will, says, I'm just going to go back home. Like they don't want me. I'm just going to go back. And he continued to persist even after he became king, and he earned his kingship through an act of heroism in saving the people of Jabesh Gilead from an Ammonite raid that was going to, upon the surrender, gouge out the right eyes of every single male in the village. Now, after King Saul became king, the Philistines were raiding the Israelites. And Samuel told Saul, okay, go and meet the Philistines for battle, but don't engage them yet. Wait 7 days, and then we'll be there, and we'll offer sacrifices to God, and he'll tell us what to do. Well, Saul did as Samuel asked, and the 7th day arrived. But Samuel, it seemed, was going to either show up late or not at all. And so the soldiers were getting restless, and they're like, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe we're going to be defeated. And they started to think about going home. And Saul knew their rumblings, and he felt the pressure getting to him. And he said, bring me the burnt offerings that we brought for Samuel, and I'll just sacrifice them myself. Exceeding the authority that he was allotted by God, and doing something that under no circumstances did he have the right to do. And as he was doing it, Samuel showed up and said, what are you doing? And Saul said, well, I was scared because the men were thinking of deserting, and so I had to do something, so I offered the sacrifices. And Samuel said, you have done a foolish thing. God would have established your kingdom forever. Do you not have confidence in his ability to do so? But now the kingdom will not continue after your reign is over. But God was willing to give Saul another chance. There was a tribe called the Amalekites, who, when Moses was leading the people through the wilderness, they had attacked in order to stop them from getting to Canaan, to prove that Yahweh was weaker than their gods, and specifically attacking the old and the weak, showing a disgusting example of preying on those who could not defend themselves. And they had never repented, and instead they had, in all likelihood, hailed that up as an example of them being stronger, at least to some degree, than Yahweh. And Yahweh decided, it's time. It is time for wrath to be poured out upon them. And he told King Saul, go and wipe out their entire civilization. Do not let a single aspect of their culture remain standing. Destroy the people and get rid of their items, their buildings, and even all their animals. Don't spare anything. And so King Saul went, and he raided, and he wiped out the civilization. But he spared the best sheep and the best cattle. And Samuel went to Saul, and he said, what have you done this time? And Saul said, oh, I obeyed God's instructions. And Samuel said, if that was the case, then why? Why do I hear the bleating of sheep and the bloating of oxen? And Saul said, well, the people thought that maybe we should make sacrifices to God, so we kept the best in order to sacrifice to him. And Samuel was just like, stop! Do you think that God wants sacrifices more than he wants you simply to obey him and do the right thing? Obeying and doing what is right is more important to God than sacrifices. And understanding and heeding his word is more important than any charity that you could do. So now you had a chance to redeem yourself, but instead the kingdom will be handed over to someone who is better than you. And Saul, he pleaded for forgiveness and admitted, the people wanted me to do this, and I listened to them, and I obeyed them, being a weak beta, a simp, who instead of sticking by the convictions of his faith, chose instead to bow to the popular whim of the masses. And but by this time, he still was not able to redeem himself, because God had given him a chance, and he refused to take it, and still refused to humble himself enough to know that he did not deserve the throne, that it was a gift from God. Because when David was anointed king, and David defeated Goliath, and the people were saying, Saul has slain the thousands, but David has slain tens of thousands, Saul became the jealous brother beta. And he tried to kill David on numerous occasions. And he hunted him and sent David into exile, which is how David ended up becoming a captain of 600 outlaws and their families. Now, at the time close to King Saul's death, the Philistines were invading again, and they outnumbered the Israelites, and King Saul was scared, and he asked God to send him a message. But by this time, he had turned from God so much, he had even murdered the priests of God. And so God would not answer him. And so King Saul, again like a beta, rather than accepting that God had turned away from him, decided to consult with a sorceress to bring up Samuel's ghost, who at this time had died. That is how far his beta spirit took him. And to this day, this beta spirit is something that people want to encourage in this modern culture among men. Rather than men standing up for their principles, they say, no, you let these people have the power, because you are part of a group that has already had too much power, so you do not get to have an opinion. And so many men buy into this. For crying out loud, in the latest season of the Amazon show The Boys, there is a beta individual named Huey, and he is going through a crisis of masculinity, saying, I am not competent in this team that I am a part of, and so I need to build myself some competence. And by the end of the season, what does he learn? No, I don't need to be a competent individual. I just instead need to feed all of the other members of my team, more specifically the girl boss on my team, so that she can be the competent one. This is not what men are called to be. Men are called to be warriors, and they're called to be leaders, and they're called to be beneficial members of whatever group that they are a part of. And not just necessarily in feeding those who are competent, but continuously developing their own competence. The part of chivalry that these betas never understand is that the strong must help the weak, and the weak must emulate the strong. The weak are not supposed to try to tear the strong down, but rather to emulate the characteristics that made them strong in the first place. So what is ultimately the solution for the beta males? The poem by Rudyard Kipling, known as If, is the greatest answer to this question. The way the poem goes is, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all others doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, be lied about and not deal in lies, be hated and not give way to hating, and not look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those imposters just the same. If you can hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, and see that which you gave your life for broken, and stoop to rebuild it with worn out tools. If you can make a heap of all your winnings and risk them in a turn of pitch and toss, and lose and have to start again at the beginning, and not breathe one word of what you've lost. If you can force your heart and nerves and sinew to serve your turn long after they are done, and so hold on when there is nothing else in you except the will that says to them, hold on. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or talk with kings and not lose the common touch, if neither foe nor loving friend can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 40 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that is in it. And what's more, You will be a man, my son. We're going to walk through the steps of that poem so that we can understand what it takes for the beta to reach his alpha status. First of all, a beta has to be able to keep his head in times of chaos. An example of an alpha performing this is Stonewall Jackson. At the Battle of Bull Run, Stonewall Jackson was the reason that the Confederates won that battle. The Confederates were put on their heels. They were running away from the superior cannon artillery that the Union had. But the Confederates looked up and saw Stonewall Jackson. No matter all the fire that was flying about him, all the bullets, all the cannons, he and his horse just stood there as a stone wall, hence the nickname. And so all the Confederates turned back, rallied, and ended up winning the Battle of Bull Run. In addition to that, you need to be able to trust your decisions in humility. While you're supposed to be willing to heed others' advice, you need to make a decision and you need to make it firm. While taking their advice, the decision always has to be yours. That is the spirit of an alpha, taking responsibility and making the judgment call. Then you also need to have patience. You need to have patience in spite of the time that you have to wait, in spite of the slander that people will say about you, and in spite of the hate that you may gain as a result. When you know that it's the right thing to do, you need to be patient and wait for the results, no matter what anybody else says. And you can't just be a dreamer. Just being a dreamer, it comes from a very genuine place when you dream about ways to make the world around you better. But when you're just dreaming, it's a very beta spirit. To be perfectly honest, I dreamed about doing this podcast or something like it for years. And only recently did I gain the courage to actually move forward and put myself out here in front of you all. And making your dreams into action is part of being an alpha. You also need to be able to rebuild in spite of destruction. No matter what life throws at you, if your alpha strength is conditional on things going your way, then it isn't an alpha strength at all. It's a very beta mentality because it doesn't recognize that at any time the game can change, because the world we live in is subject to change because it is subject to time, and time changes everything. That is the nature of time. So you need to be adaptable so that you can actually work with time. And when the chaos comes, you can either be ready to withstand it or you can be ready to rebuild after it. For example, Dwight L. Moody. He was one of the most famous preachers, and he lost almost everything in one of the great Chicago fires. And he was approached by someone who said, "I'm sorry, I heard you lost everything." And Dwight L. Moody said, "Oh, thank you, but you heard wrong." And the person said, "Well, how much do you have left?" And Moody said, "I have no idea, but I do know that I have a great deal more than I lost." And the person said, "But you can't tell me how much you have?" And Moody said, "No." And the person said, "Well, I didn't realize you were that rich." And Moody said, "Maybe not, but my Bible says that he who overcomes will inherit all things." And this is the truth. No matter how unforgiving the many it is, if you put in that 40 seconds of effort, if you just keep striving, you are going to reap an endless harvest. Maybe in this life, definitely in the next one. And then you have to stand by your convictions. You cannot lose your virtue. You cannot give up on doing what is right because the crowd is pressuring you to do so. That is a very beta thing to do. It is not what alphas do. But at the same time, how are you supposed to know that you're right? Everyone has their own perspective. How do you know? You know by letting God be your compass, letting his truth be the compass that points you in the right direction, and you let the wisdom that he has shown you in the scriptures be the map that'll guide you through the difficult times and the difficult terrain and the difficult people that you will need to navigate. Proverbs in particular is an excellent source of knowing how to apply this wisdom so that you can understand how to live your life. But at the same time, you got to take responsibility for it. There's this movie that was made by Pureflix. I don't have that much respect for the company because their content is less than quality in terms of actual performance, writing, and other such. But every once in a while, they do have a good bit of philosophy. And in this one movie, Interview with God, there was this reporter who's having an interview with someone who could be God. Don't know. We're going to find out. And at the time when it is revealed that it is in fact God, God confronts the reporter with the fact that he was going to embark on a journey of immediate and permanent self-destruction. And the reporter said, will you let this happen to me? God says, how so? And the reporter says, I prayed and I begged you for help. God says, and you think that bad things happen because I don't care? Bad things happen every day, every second of every day. And you know this, you said it yourself. But the truth is that most people only notice the bad things when it happens to them. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. And the reporter yells at God, do something. And God says, yes, do something. You have more power than you know. I hear you all when you say, why is there hunger, disease, war? Why do children go missing? Why do people lose hope? Why do marriages fail? And God tells him, food can be grown, diseases can be cured, wars can be ended, children can be found, veterans can be helped, marriages can be saved. So when you ask, why is all of this happening? Start by looking to each other, and that's where you'll find me. And the reporter says, no, I need a miracle. And God says, miracles happen every day, and sometimes that miracle is you. And that is an undeniable truth. You are a miracle who God has put here for a purpose, and you have the capacity to be of such great service to your fellow man, and in doing so, being of service to yourself and to God. But the fact that you're a miracle is an undeniable fact. At this point, even scientists are agreeing that your very existence is miraculous. There was an article published in a scientific journal called The Cause of the Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic? And it was published in a journal known as the Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology Journal. This article was written by 30 scientists in the molecular biology field. This included immunologists, synthetic chemists, organic chemists, microbiologists, medical practitioners of microscopic disease, all different facets of life. And then when they were discussing the information contained within our DNA, they said that the idea of amino acids transitioning into a single-celled organism capable of replication requires an informational hurdle of super astronomical proportions and could not have happened in the timeline of Earth except, we believe, by a miracle. This was published in a mainline scientific journal that at this point, a single-celled organism is a miracle. How much more are you when you are a 6 trillion-celled organism capable of understanding some of the highest mysteries of the universe? You weren't made to be a beta. You still have so much competence that you can give in your service. And I know that many of you want to because we're social creatures by nature. So work on improving yourself and work on incorporating the virtues of an alpha into your life. And we'll go more over those in far more detail in another series. But in the meantime, the best way that you can improve yourself is to incorporate courage into your life, because beta-ness is ultimately a form of cowardice. You've got to learn to stand firm. In spite of the shouts, in spite of the waves, and in spite of the earthquakes, you got to learn to stand. And when you do that, your alphaness will truly come to the foray, and you will be able to serve your community like you always dreamed that you could. And I pray that that is the journey you will choose to take. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I enjoy doing this so much. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and please follow along with me. I announce episodes on Wednesdays, and I'm going to be uploading them on Saturday nights. So thank you all so much for watching. I love doing this with you, and I can't wait to share some more content. Thank you so much. God be with you.